No, don't hang your queen. Oh, he just.
You could also take me, actually.
Oh, he just threw. Oh, let's go to Charlie.
Castle?
Oh,
yeah, he reserves the right to castle.
no. Oh,
yeah, I didn't think that through, actually.
Charlie had
I
it.
I got the queen off the board.
Oh, Charlie had it. Bishop takes knight was a check, and you remove the defense of the queen. So e4 was played, d5 played by Ludwig, pawn takes, queen takes, knight c3, queen d6. So first things first, a lot of Scandinavian players have been taught to play queen a5. It is a little bit more flexible and easier to play with c6, bishop f5, e6. You get a very sort of straightforward position because you have very simple ideas in terms of what you're playing for, with pawn to e6, knight to f6, knight d7, and then like a bishop b4 or even a bishop d6 move. So it's a lot easier for black to play. Ludwig plays queen d6, which I do like, sort of avoiding the preparation of Charlie. D4, knight f6, knight f3, a6, bishop d3, knight c6. Pretty standard. I like a6, good move. It's sort of his dual function. If white goes bishop c4 here to attack on f7, you can now play b5 and fianchetto your bishop on this long a to h1 diagonal. And then after bishop d3, you go knight c6. You change it around. You don't push the pawn because the bishop is not on c4. So in this case, the pawn is actually useful because you want to develop your bishop on this diagonal versus on this diagonal, since you don't gain a tempo. Here you could play pawn to b5, but you'll notice the bishop is here. It does nothing. So you will get to fianchetto your bishop, but it's a little bit less worthwhile because you don't gain time. So knight c6 is played here by Ludwig, and now a6 also makes sense because white can never move the knight here, attacking the queen and the pawn, because you would very simply capture it. So instead, knight e2 is played by Charlie. Bishop to g4 here, bishop to f4, queen to d7, pawn to c3. Very good move by Charlie. He creates the connect 3 in the center. The only issue, of course, is that black can take the knight on f3. So now castles. Charlie goes h3, and here Ludwig again should have taken the knight on f3 and crippled the white pawns. White cannot castle the king to the king side because there's a stacked set of pawns and a weak pawn on h3. Instead, he goes bishop h5. Now Charlie castles, pawn to e6. Again, there's an opportunity here where you can play bishop takes pawn, or bishop takes knight, and white gets the very disturbed double pawns here and a very open king. And after queen takes h3, black is just very simply up a pawn and winning due to the big weaknesses in the white position. Instead, e6 is played here by Ludwig. Now Charlie goes g4 and Ludwig sacks. Now objectively, this is not the best move. It would have been better to move the bishop back and try to play h5 and open up the king side, but I do like knight takes pawn, because after pawn takes, bishop takes, there are a lot of threats towards the knights on f3 and e2, and also this idea of playing e5 and breaking the center is still very strong for black. So now knight to g3 is played here. Bishop to d6 is played. Again, a reasonable move by Ludwig, but e5 would have been very strong here, because if white captures with the pawn, you can take the bishop, queen takes, rook takes, and now you're no longer down a piece anymore because you've recaptured this bishop in return for the knight that you gambited. So e5 would have been very strong. If white takes with the knight, you just trade the knights, and after takes, you win the queen on d1. And then the last point is, if white plays bishop takes e5 here, you go bishop takes f3, queen takes, knight takes bishop, forking the queen and the bishop, white takes, and again you take the bishop on d3.
Just subscribed.
So basically all the ideas here with e5 are very, very strong for black. Now Ludwig could have tried this again. It's not a big deal, but I think the big issue, since you guys are saying Ludwig is watching, that matter is that Ludwig needed to realize that he had sacrificed a knight for 2 pawns. So when you've made a sacrifice, you generally need to be very aggressive. The more passive you are, the longer that white has to sort of recover and defend its position. Eventually the knights and the bishops are going to be more powerful than a couple of pawns on the king side. So it's really important that that you focus on being aggressive when you made a sacrifice here. So bishop e2, f6, reasonable move by Ludwig. He tries to prevent the knight from jumping and also maybe just fling his pawns down the king side here. So now queen to b3, h5, knight to e4. Now here Ludwig plays queen f4. Very nice move by Ludwig, because again, if you go passive like queen e7, now after knight to c5, you'll see that even though white's king is a little bit open here, you have no pieces that are attacking it. Your queen and your rooks, they're all very far away from the white king, and white is actually very much on the offensive here with the knight and the bishop and the queen targeting the very weak black queen side here. These pawns on b7 and a6 are super weak. So he plays queen f4. Great move by Ludwig. Knight to c5, knight to a5 here. Fantastic move by Ludwig. The only move that gives him the advantage here. Any other move and Ludwig would have been in trouble, I believe, in this position, but he plays knight a5. Brilliant move. Guards against the checkmate throw with the knight and the queen, but then secondly he's attacking the queen while attacking the knight on f3 because you have 1-2 attacking the knight. White only has 1 defending it. So knight a5 is a brilliant move by Ludwig. Now queen a4 is played. Ludwig takes the bishop, and here Charlie takes, correctly not taking the knight, because then as Ludwig saw during his stream, you can play queen g4 check, king to h2, and now you go queen g2, and it's a classic lolly checkmate with the bishop and the queen. So instead he plays bishop takes f3, and now here Ludwig makes a mistake. He plays b6. Now again, in terms of the position, it's very difficult here to figure out what the way to win here is exactly. But after queen takes f3, white takes knight a5 here, you have a lot of opportunities. Now again, I know in the post-game interview the commentators are like, oh, just go rook d5 or go rook h6. You have a couple of lifts with the rook. I don't think it's very realistic to expect a player at this level to find it. The only thing that I would say about the position that I think Ludwig should be aware of is that in this position the king is very open. There's nothing really around it, so you want to be looking for ways, because right now you have a queen that's very close to the king, so you want to be looking for ways to attack the white king here, whether it's like, you know, the rook lifts, which are not realistic to find, or even an idea like h4 h3 makes a lot of sense here, to go h4 h3 and make the lolly checkmate on g2. Secondly, let's say white plays rook e1 h3. If you played like rook to e3, there's queen g2, checkmate with the queen and the pawn. And if white goes king f1, you can go h2 followed by h1. Let's just say rook moves, you go h1 queen, and it's a checkmate. The king cannot go anywhere here, so the white king is checkmated. You think even at his level rook lifts are, I mean, maybe you can say that, I think if Ludwig has 10 minutes to think here in this position, he probably sees the idea with the rook lift with like 10 or 15 minutes. Again, with like 5 minutes on the clock, very complicated situation, a lot of people watching, a lot of stress. I do not think it's realistic. I think if Levy had found, or not Levy, sorry, if Ludwig had found rook t5 or rook h6 here, I think it would have been amazing. I would have been very impressed. But again, I think expecting Ludwig to find that is not realistic. So instead he plays b6, and now here Charlie plays knight takes pawn, queen takes bishop, knight takes rook, and now he takes. And again, one thing that I think is important in this position after rook takes and rook a e1 here, one thing that I would say here that's really important is that you want to look at the queen and the king here. Now when you count the material, you have a rook and a knight versus 2 rooks, so again you can kind of try to make a check. The rook lift exists, again, not very practical to try and find rook d5, rook g5. If you don't see it in the first place, you're never going to see it. So I think that's really important, but you really want to be aware that when you have like something near a king here, where like there's a king, a pawn, and a rook here, you want to try to see, is there another piece you can bring to attack the king, because you can't solely checkmate with one queen. You need like a pawn and a queen, or you need a bishop. A queen alone is not enough to make a checkmate. Now if you do play rook d5 here, it doesn't actually work. So white can go check and then queen e4, and you cannot go rook g5 check because that actually puts your king in check. So this is a brilliant way for white to hang on here in this position, and white would be doing white would actually be winning here. So instead he goes king b7, rook e7, g5, queen c2, knight c6, rook f7, g4. Now a lot of credit has to go to Charlie. Very difficult game under a lot of pressure on the clock, on the board, and here he found a brilliant move, queen to h7, an amazing move, the best move in the position, because you attack the pawn on h5, but you also line up a threat with your rook and your queen towards the pawn on c7. Brilliant move by Charlie. So now rook c8 is played, queen h5, knight to d8, rook g7, knight e6, and the one last trick here is that Charlie finds queen takes pawn, and now black cannot take the rooks. If you take the rook, you lose your queen, and after queen takes, rook takes, Charlie obtains a winning position. I will just show the moves, but there's very little I need to add here. So f5, rook h4, king h1. By the way, one important point, not king h2, because after knight to g5 there are ideas with forks here. If it goes king h1, knight g5, rook g1, perfect. No king on h2, so there's no fork here, and now the rest is pretty straightforward here. Not much really to add. Here Charlie plays rook takes f4, another very nice move to simplify the position. and after takes, it's just a winning king and pawn endgame. Charlie makes no slip-ups here, just plays all the right moves, and now he realizes they're stalemate, so he goes over. He plays b3, good move, not going back with the king to f6, leaving a square on g7 for the black king. And now he just goes all in, pushes the pawn, check, check, queen g7, and he makes a ladder checkmate with the 2 queens, and it's just a very easy checkmate. Very nice first game by Charlie to win and take the lead 1-0 in the match. So now we'll go to the second game between Charlie and Ludwig. So let's pop this one up. Okay, so game 2. Game starts pawn to e4, pawn to c5, c3. So Ludwig plays the Alpin Sicilian, also known as the c3 Sicilian, because you push the pawn to from c2 to c3. Not to be confused with the c4 Sicilian, which would be very, very explosive. So c3, knight to c6, pawn to d4. Now here Charlie trades and goes g6. Now I think in this case Charlie got a little bit confused, because in the blitz game he played it a little bit differently, but here he goes g6, and after d5, taking the center, knight to e5, pawn to f4, Charlie finds his knight trapped in the center of the board. You cannot go to c4 or g4 here, and all the squares lead to capture. So pawn captures, bishop captures, queen captures, knight or the queen on d3. So bishop g7 takes, knight f3, bishop g7, knight c3, d6. And now here Ludwig plays a move that's very logical, makes a lot of sense. Queen a4, let's trade off the queens. I'm up a juicer, why not? Now in this situation, unfortunately, Charlie was moving quickly and he traded queens right away, missing the very nice move bishop takes knight, which is a check on the white king. And not only is it a check, but when white recaptures the bishop, you'll notice there's no longer a knight protecting the queen. So after pawn takes bishop, black just eats the queen on a4, and black is simply winning. He's up a queen, and Charlie would have won this game very smoothly. So in this position, they trade knight f6, knight c3, castles, white castles, knight d7, rook e1 here, rook c8. Oh, did someone just raid? I guess someone hosted me with 1573. Thank you to ENKK, appreciate it. Thank you for the raid. So rook c8. We're going over the games from PogChamps 3 today between Ludwig Ogren and Turbofisto Charlie, also known as MoistCr1tikal on Twitch. So thank you to Enkin for the host with 1573 once again. All right, so a6 is played, knight to d4, knight to e5 is played, knight takes knight. Now here Charlie takes. It would have been better to take with the bishop and keep the diagonal open for the black bishop. Instead they take knight f3, rook c2, b3, e6, d6. Now the rest of the game is actually pretty smooth by Ludwig here. Rook d8, rook d1, bishop g5 takes, and now Ludwig correctly realizes nothing matters except one thing: the passed pawn and trying to make a queen, trying to upgrade that pawn as fast as you can. So now g5, rook to c1. Brilliant move by Ludwig here, because now if you take, you go rook c8 and you just win the rook, make a queen. So king f7, and now Ludwig again, another amazing move. Bishop takes pawn on g5, and after pawn takes knight takes, Ludwig has sacrificed the bishop, but in return he gets an assassin here where he collects the rook on e4, and now white has 2 rooks and a knight against 1 rook and a bishop, and white is just very cleanly up a rook. So bishop h6, rook c8, trade, rook h8, king f1, and the rest is pretty straightforward here. Just takes Exposy, she's not my girlfriend, thank you very much though. Rook takes e6, e3, and now rook d6, h4, and white just runs the pawn up the board, and this is just a very clean very clean victory for white here. So we keep going, takes h6, takes h7, a5, white makes a queen here, a4, rook b6, king c2, queen c8, and Ludwig does not actually play this correctly, but he still finds a checkmate here. So queen b8, queen b3, check, and queen takes c1, and this is a clean checkmate here for white. And Ludwig wins the second game. Not much really to say other than the opening. I would say for Charlie, he didn't realize that d5 was a very strong move, taking the whole center of the board here. All right, so let's keep going. There's one more game, and now this is where I'm going to talk a lot about talk a lot about this about what happens here. So in this third and final game, this was the Armageddon game. The match is 1-1. So they play Armageddon. Now I will reiterate the statements of Ludwig and MoistCr1tikal here, and what I will say is that I don't think Armageddon is the right format for for PogChamps. I think white and black do not have a big advantage, or black, sorry, does not have a draw advantage with 1 minute less. So I think in general terms, what I would say is that I think they should just have blitz games versus Armageddon, because I think there's too much of an advantage for white. So e4, c5, c3, same opening, and now here Charlie correctly plays d5, does not allow the white pawn push to d5. So they trade. Knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight to f6, castles is played, castles, bishop e3. A very good move by Ludwig, supports his center pawns here, and he wants to bring the knight to c3. He can't do it right now, but by threatening to capture, Charlie is forced to capture, and now you bring the knight out and attack the queen. e6, a4, h5 is played here, bishop b5, a6, trades, b4. Now here Ludwig gets a little bit too aggressive. I think with the time situation he started panicking. A better move is rook to c1 here to put pressure on the c file down towards the queen on c6 and the king on c8. So b4, e5, rook to c1, and now here Charlie blunders with bishop takes b4. What he really needed to play here was go king to b8 and slide the king off of this open file. Instead he plays bishop takes b4, and now knight to a2 played by Ludwig, and a really nice move. Attacks the bishop, lines up a pin towards the king and the queen here, and white is completely winning. So after takes king b8, knight b4, not really much more to go over, but I will add just a little bit more. So rook to c8, queen to b2, trade, knight d4, rook e8. No real mistakes. Ludwig plays f3. I like f3, opens up the king here. Bishop c8, bishop f2, h4, h3, g5, and now queen e2. And very little to add. Queen c5, knight d7, and now Ludwig here correctly plays knight d to c6, a very nasty move. If black goes king a8, there's queen a7. If black takes, there's checkmate, and if black goes king to c7, there's a beautiful knight to d5, which is just a clean checkmate here. King is under attack on c7, and there's nothing that black can do. So Charlie goes king a8 after queen a7. Ludwig wins the game, takes the Armageddon, and wins overall by the final match score of 2-1. He does finish as the top seed in Group D, so the pairings are finally set.